One issue with inheritance is using the methods of a superclass in its subclass. So we're going to take a look at how we would actually handle that. Let's suppose we have some class, which we'll call subclass, and this is derived from another class, which we're going to call superclass. Original names I know, but we're just going to go with it. Now, from our rules earlier, subclass automatically inherits all the variables and the methods from superclass. Okay, so we have everything from superclass. Now, let's suppose that superclass has a method called print, and this just simply prints all the data members of superclass. So with the subclass, we actually have two options. We can either create and define our own method that would print all of its data members, or we could override the print method. So we talked a little bit about overriding earlier with our rules, but the idea with overriding a method is that the corresponding method in the subclass must have the same name, the same type, or what I mean is the return type, and the same formal parameter list. It's just now inside the body of that method, we redefine, we come up with a different body inside there and decide what we're going to do with that method. So in this case, if we were to override the print method, we would have it print all the data members of subclass rather than all the members of superclass. Now, if we want to call an overridden method, it's really no different than if we were to invoke a method on an object of the subclass. So we can just have the object of the subclass, a dot, and the name of the overwritten method, and then we call it. So everything is good there. But one question you might be asking is, what about the method from the superclass? So if I override the print method, for example, what if I want to call the print method from the superclass rather than the print method from the subclass? How do we do that? Well, in this case, if we are dealing with an overwritten method, we have to use a special word, which is called super. Then we would have the dot operator and then the name of the method. So instead of invoking the method on an object, we invoke the method on this keyword super. So the format of this would just simply be super dot and then the name of the method and then the parameters. Now, if the subclass doesn't override the method, then we just call the method as normal, because here we'd have two different methods. They're not, one doesn't override the other. So we can, since it is inherited from the superclass, I can just do the name of the subclass object, a dot, and then the name of the superclass method. But if we do override it, we can use this keyword super to help us out with that. Another issue we have to consider involves the parameters. Because let's say we pass something as a parameter into a method, and that actually corresponds to private data members of the superclass. So how do we handle that case? What if our overridden method actually requires using private members? Because remember, we mentioned before that if a member is private, no other class can directly access it. And that includes subclasses. So if we try to directly access one of these private data members in the method definition, it's not going to work. We're going to get an error. Well, what we can do is we should be able to have some method from the superclass, because there has to be methods inside the superclass that handle those private data members. So we can actually call those methods in our overridden method, and we should be able to handle those private members that way. And then the rest of the method definition can take care of the new data members. So what we would do is we would just call the corresponding method from the superclass. That method will take care of all the private data members. And then the rest of our method definition can just take care of all the new data members from the subclass. Let's take a look at an example to help illustrate this. So let's suppose I have some class, just a normal class called rectangle. And inside here I have two data members, the length and the width, and notice that both of them are private. So if I were to have any other class, I can't directly access the length and the width. And let's just suppose I have a method in here that's called setDimension. So this would set the values of length and width. Now let's take a look at another class called box. So notice this first line, public class box extends rectangle, right up here. This tells us that box is inheriting everything from the rectangle class, so it has a length and a width. But remember, those are private, so we can't directly access that. So just take note of that. So inside here, we have a new data member called height, because if you think of a box, it's a three-dimensional object, whereas a rectangle is a two-dimensional object. And inside here, we have an overridden method. We have setDimension right here. So we're creating our own version of it. And here we have some additional parameters. So we have something to handle the length, the width, and then the height. And remember, we can't directly access length and width from the rectangle class because they're private. So what we do here is we call the setDimension method from the superclass. So that's where we have this super setDimension right here. So this line is going to call setDimension from the rectangle class. So it will set the length and the width for us because it passes the L and the W. And then the next line takes care of our height data member. So we can adjust or set that variable right there. Another issue we have to be concerned with is what if we want to get the values of the private members? So we can't directly access them, but what we can do is take advantage of the accessors. So if you remember, an accessor is just simply a method that returns the value of some data member. Our superclass should have accessors in order to get, for example, the length and the width if we're using our rectangle example. So in this case, there should be some form of getLength method and some form of getWidth method in order to get the length and width values. Now you might be wondering, well, we're calling methods from the superclass. So do we need the word super in front of them? And the answer to that is no. We don't need them. We don't need to do super.getLength or super.getWidth. We can just use getLength and getWidth because we're not going to override these methods. I mean, I guess you could, but it doesn't really do us much good because those methods are supposed to give us the value of length and width, and how can you do that in the subclass? I don't know. But we don't need to override these methods, so we can just directly call getLength and getWidth in order to get the values of length and width.